Love Medicine by Louise Erdrich. Love Medicine, 1982, Lipshaw Morrissey. I never really done much with my life, I suppose. I never had a television. Grandma Cashpaw had one inside her apartment at the senior citizens, so I used to go there and watch my favorite shows. For a while, she used to call me the biggest waste on the reservation and hark back to how she saved me from my own mother, who wanted to tie me in a potato sack and throw me in a slough. Sure, I was grateful to Grandma Cashpaw for saving me like that, for raising me, but gratitude gets old, after a while stale. I had to stop thanking her. One day I told her I had paid her back in full by staying at her beck and call. I'd do anything for Grandma. She knew that. Besides, I took care of Grandpa like nobody else could on account of what a handful he'd gotten to be. But that was nothing. I know the tricks of mind and body inside out without ever having trained for it because I got the touch. It's a thing you got to be born with. I got secrets in my hands that nobody ever knew to ask. Take Grandma Cashpaw with her tired veins all knotted up in her legs like clumps of blue snails. I take my fingers and I snap them on the knots. The medicine flows out of me, the touch. I run my fingers up the maps of those rivers of veins, or I knock very gentle above their hearts, or I make a circling motion on their stomachs, and it helps them. They feel much better. Some women pay me $5. I couldn't do the touch for Grandpa, though. He was a hard nut. Some people fall right through the hole in their lives. It's invisible, but they come to it after time, never knowing where. There is this woman here, Lulu Lamartin, who always had a thing for Grandpa. She loved him since she was a girl and always said he was a genius. Now she says that his mind got so full it exploded. How can I doubt that? I know the feeling when your mental powers builds up too far. I always used to say that's why the Indians got drunk. Even statistically, we're the smartest people on the earth. Anyhow, with Grandpa, I couldn't hardly believe it because all my youth he stood out as a hero to me. When he started getting towards second childhood, he went through different moods. He would stand in the woods and cry at the top of his shirt. It scared me, scared everyone, Grandma worst of all. Yet he was so smart. Do you believe it? That he knew he was getting foolish. He said so. He told me that December I failed school and come back on the train to hoop dance. I didn't have nowhere else to go. He picked me up there and he said it straight out. I'm getting into my second childhood. And then he said something else I still remember. I've been chosen for it. I couldn't say no. So I figured that a man so smart all his life, tribal chairman and the star of movies, and even pictured in the state house and on cans of snuff, would know what he's doing by saying yes. I think he was called to second childhood like anybody else gets a call for the priesthood or the army or whatever. So I really did not listen too hard when the doctor said this was some kind of disease old people got eating too much sugar. You just can't tell me that a man who went to Washington and gave them bureaucrats what for could lose his mind from eating too much Milky Way. No, he put second childhood on himself. Behind those songs he sings out in the middle of Mass, and back of those stories that everybody knows by heart, Grandpa is thinking hard about life. I know the feeling. Sometimes I'll throw up a smokescreen to think behind. I'll hitch up to Winnipeg and play the Space Invaders for 6 hours. But all the time there and back, I will be thinking some fairly deep thoughts that surprise even me, and I'm used to it. As for him, if it was just the thoughts, there wouldn't be no problem. Smokescreen is what irritates the social structure, see? And Grandpa has done things that just distract people to the point they want to throw them in the cookie jar where they keep them mentally insane. He's far from that, I know for sure. But even Grandma has trouble keeping her patience once he started sneaking off to Lamartin's place. He's not supposed to have his candy, and Lulu feeds it to him. That's one of the reasons why he goes. Grandma tried to get me to put the touch on Grandpa soon after he began stepping out. I didn't want to, but before Grandma started telling me again what a bad state my bare behind was in before she took me home, I thought I should at least pretend. I put my hands on either side of Grandpa's head. You couldn't look at him and say he was crazy. He's a fine figure of a man, as Lamartin would say, and all his hair and half his teeth, a beak like a hawk, and cheeks like the blades of a hatchet. They put his picture on all the tourist guides to North Dakota and even copied his face for artistic paintings. I guess you could call him a monument all of himself. He started grinning when I put my hands on his templates, and I knew right away that he knew how come I touched him. I knew the smokescreen was going to fall, and I was right. Just for a moment, it fell. Let's pitch whoopee, he said across my shoulder to Grandma. They don't use that expression much around here anymore, but for damn sure it must have meant something. It got her goat right quick. She threw my hands off his head herself and stood in front of him, overmatching him pound for pound, and taller too, for she had a growth spurt in middle age, while he had shrunk. So now the length and breadth of her surpassed him. She glared and spoke her piece into his face about how he was off at all hours, tomcatting and chasing Lamartin again and making a damn old fool of himself. And you got no more whoopee to pitch anymore, she yelled at last, surprising me so my jaw just dropped. For us kids all had pretended for so long that those rustling sounds we heard from their side of the room at night never happened. She sure had pretended it, up till now anyway. I saw that tears were in her eyes, and that's when I saw how much grief and love she felt for him. And it gave me a real shock to the system. You see, I thought love got easier over the years, so it didn't hurt so bad when it hurt, or feel so good when it felt good. I thought it smoothed out and old people hardly noticed it. I thought it curled up and died, I guess. Now I saw it rear up like a whip and lash. She loved him. She was jealous. She mourned him like the dead. And he just smiled into the air, trapped in the seams of his mind. So I didn't know what to do. I was in laundry then. They were like parents to me. The way they had took me home and reared me, I could see her point for wanting to get him back the way he was, so at least she could argue with him, sleep with him, not be shamed out by Lamartin. She'd always love him. That hit me like a ton of bricks. For one whole day, I felt this odd feeling that cramped my hands. When you have the touch, that's where longing gets you. I never loved like that. It made me feel all inspired to see them fight, and I wanted to go out and find a woman who I would love until one of us died or went crazy. But I'm not like that, really. From time to time, I heal a person all up good inside. However, when it comes to the long shot, I doubt that I got staying power. And you need that staying power. Going out to love somebody, I knew this quality was not going to jump on me with no effort. So I turned my thoughts back to Grandma and Grandpa. I felt her side of it with my hands and my tangled guts, and I felt his side of it within the stretch of my mentality. He had gone out to lunch one day and never came back. He was fishing in the middle of Machimiantio, and there was big thoughts on his line, and he kept throwing them back for even bigger ones that would explain to him, say, the meaning of how we got here and why we have to leave so soon. All in all, I could not see myself treating Grandpa with the touch, bringing him back, when the real part of him had chose to be off thinking somewhere. It was only the rest of him that stayed around causing trouble, after all, and we could handle most of it without any problem. Besides, it was hard to argue with his reasons for doing some things. Take Holy Mass. I used to go there just every so often when I got frustrated mostly, because even though I know the higher power dwells every place, there's something very calming about the cool greenish inside of our mission. Or so I thought anyway. Grandpa was the one who stripped off my delusions in this matter, for it was he who busted right through what Father calls the sacred serenity of the place. We filed in that time, me and Grandma. We sat down in our pews. Then the rosary got started up pre-mass, and that's when Grandpa filled up his chest and opened his mouth and belted out them words, "Hail Mary, full of grace," and he had a powerful set of lungs. And he kept on like that. He did not let up. He hollered and he yelled them prayers. And I guess people was used to him by now because they only muttered theirs and did not quit or gawk like I did. I was getting red-faced, I admit. I gave him the elbow once or twice, but that wasn't nothing to him. He kept on. He shrieked to heaven and he pleaded like a movie actor and he pounded his chest like Tarzan in The Lord I Am Not Worthies. I thought he might hurt himself. Then after a while, I guess I got used to it. And that's when I wondered, how come? So afterward, I out and asked him, how come? How come you yelled? God don't hear me otherwise, said Grandpa Cashbar. I sweat. I broke right into the little cold sweat in my hairline because I knew this was perfectly right. And for years, not one damn other person had noticed it. God's been going deaf. Since the Old Testament, God's been deafening up on us. I read, see. Besides the dictionary, which I'm constantly in use of, I had this Bible once. I read it. I found there were discrepancies between then and now. It struck me. Here God used to raineth bread from clouds, smite the Philippines, sling fire down on red light districts where people got stabbed. He even appeared in person every once in a while. God used to pay attention, is what I'm saying. Now, there's your God in the Old Testament, and there's Chippewa gods as well. Indian gods, good and bad, like Trickery Nanaboso, or the water monster Misepeshu, who lives over in Machimanito. That water monster was the last god I ever heard to appear. It had a weakness for young girls and grabbed one of the pillagers off her rowboat. She got to shore all right, but only after this monster had its way with her. She's an old lady now, old lady pillager. She still doesn't like to see her family fish that lake. Our gods aren't perfect, is what I'm saying, but at least they come around. They'll do a favor if you ask them right. You don't have to yell, but you do have to know, like I said, how to ask in the right way. That makes problems because to ask proper was an art that was lost to the Chippewas once the Catholics gained ground. Even now, I have to wonder if higher power turned it back, if we got to yell, or if we just don't speak its language. I looked around me. How else could I explain what all I had seen in my short life? King smashing his fists and things, Gordy drinking himself down to the Bismarck hospitals, or Aunt June left by a white man to wander off in the snow. How else to explain the times my touch don't work? And further back to the old-time Indians who was swept away in the outright germ warfare and dirty dog killing of the whites. In those times, us Indians was so much kindlier than now. We took them in. Oh yes, I'm bitter as an old cutworm just thinking of how they'd done to us and doing still. So Grandpa Cashpaw just opened my eyes a little there. Was there any sense relying on a god whose ears was stopped? Just like the government? I says then, right off, maybe we got nothing but ourselves. And that's not much, just personally speaking. I know I don't got the cold hard potatoes it takes to understand everything. Still, there's things I like to do. For instance, I'd like to help some people like my grandpa and grandma Cashpaw get back some happiness within the tail end of their lives. I told you once before I couldn't see my way clear to putting the direct touch on grandpa's mind, and I kept my moral there. But something soon happened to make me think a little bit of mental adjustment wouldn't do him and the rest of us no harm. It was after we saw him one afternoon in the sunshine courtyard of the senior citizens with Lulu Lamartin. Grandpa used to like to dig there. He had his little dandelion fork out, and he was prying up them dandelions right and left while Lamartin watched him. He's scratching up the dirt all right, said Grandma, watching Lamartin watch Grandpa out the window. Now, Lamartin was about half the considerable size of Grandma, but you would never think of sizes anyway. They were different in an even more noticeable way. It was the difference between a house fixed up with paint and picky fence and a house left to weather away into the soft earth, is what I am saying. Lamartin was jacked up, batiste, shuttered, and vinyl-sided, while Grandma sagged and bulged on her slipped foundations and let her hair go the silver gray of rain-dried lumber. Right now, she eyed the Lamartins' pert flowery dress with such a look it despaired me. I knew what this could lead to with Grandma. Alternating tongue storms and rock-hard silences was hard on a man, even one who didn't notice, like Grandpa. So I went fetching him. But he was gone when I popped through the little screen door that led out on the courtyard. There was nobody out there either, to point which way they went, just the dandelion fork quibbling upright in the ground. That gave me an idea. I snookered over to the Lamartins' door and I listened in first, then knocked, but nobody. So I went walking through the lounges and around the card tables. Still nobody. Finally, it was my touch that led me to the laundry room. I cracked the door. I went in. There they were. And he was really loving her up good, boy. And she was going hell for leather. Sheets was flapping on the lines above, and washcloths, pillowcases, shirts was also flying through the air, for they was trying to clear out a place for themselves in a high-heaped but shallow laundry cart. The washers and the dryers was all on, chock full of quarters, shaking and moaning. I couldn't hear what Grandpa and the Lamartin was billing and cooing, and they couldn't hear me. I didn't know what to do, so I went inside and shut the door. The Lamartin wore a big, curly, light brown wig. Looked like one of them squeaky little white people dogs. Poodles, they call them. Anyway, that wig is what saved us from the worst, for I could hardly shout and tell them I was in there. No more could I try and grab him. I was trapped where I was. There was nothing I could do, really, but hold the door shut. I was scared of somebody else upsetting in and really getting an eyeful. Turned out, though, in the heat of the clinch, that I was trying to avert my eyes, you see. The Lamartin's curly wig jumped off her head. And if you ever been in the midst of something and had a big change like that occur in the someone, You can't help know how it devastates your basic urges. Not only that, but her wig was almost with a life of its own. Grandpa's eyes were bugging at the change already, and swear to God, if the thing didn't rear up and pop him in the face like it was going to start something. He scrambled up, Grandpa did, and the Lamartin jumped up after him, all addled looking. They just stared at each other, huffing and puffing with quizzical expression. The surprise seemed to drive all sense completely out of Grandpa's mind. The letter was what started the fire, he said. I never would have done it. What letter? Said the Lamartin. She was stiff-necked now and elegant, even bald, like some alien queen. I gave her back the wig. The Lamartin replaced it on her head, and whenever I saw her after that, I couldn't help thinking of her bald, with special powers, as if from another planet. That was a close call, I said to Grandpa after she had left, but I think he had already forgot the incident. He just stood there all quiet and thoughtful. You really wouldn't think he was crazy. He looked like he was just about to say something important, explaining himself. He said something all right, but it didn't have nothing to do with anything that made sense. He wondered where the heck he put his dandelion fork. That's when I decided about the mental adjustment. Now, what was mostly our problem was not so much that he was not all there, but that what was there of him often hankered after Martin. If we could just put a stop to that, I thought, we might be getting someplace. But here, see, my touch was of no use. For what could I snap my fingers at to make him faithful to Grandma? Like the quality of staying power, this faithfulness was invisible. I know it's something that you got to acquire, but I never known where from. Maybe there's no rhyme or reason to it, like my getting the touch. And then again, maybe it's a kind of magic. It was Grandma Cashpaw who thought of it in the end. She knows things. Although she would not admit she has a scrap of Indian blood in her, there's no doubt in my mind she's got some Chippewa. How else would you explain the way she'll be sitting there in front of her TV story, rocking in her armchair, and suddenly she turns on me, her brown eyes hard as lake-bent flint. Lipshaw Morrissey, she'll say, you went out last night and got drunk. How did she know that? I'll hardly remember it myself. Then she'll say she just had a feeling or ache in the scar of her hand or a creak in her shoulder. She is constantly being told things by little aggravations in her joints or by her household appliances. One time she told Gordy never to ride with the crazy Lamartin boy. She had seen something in the polished up tin of her bread toaster. So he didn't. Sure enough, the time came when we heard how Lyman and Henry went out of control in their car, ending up in the river. Henry swam to the top, but Henry never made it. Thanks to Grandma's toaster, Gordy was probably spared. Someplace in the blood, Grandma Cashpaw knows things. She also remembers things, I found. She keeps things filed away. She's got a memory like them video games that don't forget your score. One reason she remembers so many details about the trouble I gave her in early life is so she can flash back her total when she needs to. Like now, take the love medicine. I don't know where she remembered that from. It came tumbling from her mind like an asteroid off the corner of the screen. Of course, she starts out by mentioning the time I had this accident in church, and did she leave me there with wet overalls? No, she didn't. And ain't I glad? Yes, I am. Now, what you want now, Grandma? But when she mentions them love medicines, I feel my back prickle at the danger. These love medicines is something of an old Chippewa specialty. No other tribe has got them down so well. But love medicines is not for the layman to handle. You don't just go out and get one without paying for it. Before you get one, even, you should go through one hell of a lot of mental condensation. You got to think it over. Choose the right one. You could really mess up your life grinding up the wrong little thing. So anyhow, I said to Grandma, I'd give this love medicine some thought. I knew the best thing was to go ask a specialist, like Old Lady Pillager, who lives up in a tangle of bush and never shows herself. But the truth is, I was afraid of her, like everyone else. She was known for putting the twisted mouth on people, seizing up their hearts. Old Lady Pillager was serious business, and I have always thought it best to steer clear of that whenever I could. That's why I took the powers in my own hands. That's why I did what I could. I put my whole mentality to it, nothing held back. After a while, I started to remember things I'd heard gossiped over. I heard of this person once who carried a charm of seeds that looked like baby pearls. They was attracted to a metal knife, which made them powerful. But I didn't know where them seeds grew. Another love charm I heard about I couldn't go along with, because how was I supposed to catch frogs in the act, which it required? Them little creatures is slippery and fast. And then the powerfulest of all, the most extreme, involved nail clips and such. I wasn't anywhere near asking Grandma to provide me all the little body bits that this last love recipe called for. I went walking around for days just trying to think up something that would work. Well, I got it. If it hadn't been the early fall of the year, I never would have got it. But I was sitting underneath a tree one day down near the school, just watching people's feet go by when something tells me, look up, look up. So I look up and I see two honkers, Canada geese, the kind with little masks on their faces, a bird what mates for life. I see them flying right over my head, naturally preparing to land in some slough on the reservation, which they certainly won't get off alive. It hits me anyway. Them geese, they mate for life. And I think to myself, just what if I went out and got a pair? And just what if I fed some part, say the goose heart, of the female to grandma, and grandpa ate the other heart? Wouldn't that work? Maybe it's all invisible, and then maybe again, it's magic. Love is a stony road. We know that for sure. If it's true that the higher feelings of devotion get lodged in the heart, like some people say, then we'd be home free. If not, eating goose heart couldn't harm nobody anyway. I thought it was worth my effort, and Grandma Cashpot thought so too. She had always known a good idea when she heard one. She borrowed me Grandpa's gun. So I went out to this particular slough, maybe the exact same slough I never got thrown in by my mother, thanks to Grandma Cashpaw, and I hunched down in a good, comfortable pile of rushes. I got my gun loaded up. I ate a few of these soft bologna sandwiches Grandma made me for lunch, and then I waited. The cattails blown back and forth above my head, them stringy blue herons were spearing up their prey. The thing I know how to do best in this world, the thing I've been training for all my life, is to wait. Sitting there was no hardship on me. I got to thinking about some funny things that happened. There was this one time that Lulu Lamartin's little blue Tweety bird, a paraslet, I guess you'd call it, flown up inside her dress and got lost within there. I recalled her running out into the hallway trying to yell something, shaking. She was doing a right good jig there, cutting the rug for sure. And the thing is, it never flown out. To this day, people speculate where it went. They fear she might perhaps have crushed it in her corsets. It sure hasn't ever yet been seen alive. I thought of funny things for a while, but then I used them up, and strange things that happened started weaseling their way into my mind. I got to thinking quite naturally of the Lamartin's cousin named Wristwatch. I never knew what his real name was. They called him Wristwatch because he got his father's broken wristwatch as a young boy when his father passed on. Now, in his whole life, did Wristwatch take his father's watch off. He didn't care if it worked, although after a while he got sensitive when people asked what time it was, teasing him. He often put it to his ear like he was listening to the tick, but it was broken for good and forever. People said so. At least, that's what they thought. Well, I saw Wristwatch smoking in his pickup one afternoon, and by 9 that evening, he was dead. He died sitting at the Lamartin's table, too, as she told it. Wristwatch had just eaten himself a good-sized dinner, and she said he'd take seconds on the hot dish when he fell over to the floor. They turned him over. He was gone. But here's the strange thing. When the senior citizen's orderly took the pulse, he noticed that the wristwatch wore, was now working. The moment he died, the wristwatch started keeping perfect time. They buried him with the watch still ticking on his arm. I got to thinking, what if some grave diggers dug up Wristwatch's casket in 200 years and that watch was still going? I thought what question they would ask, and it was this: whose hand wound it? I started shaking like a piece of grass at the thought. Not to get off the subject or nothing, I was still hunkered in the slough. It was passing late into the afternoon, and still no honkers had touched down. Now, I don't need to tell you that the waiting did not get to me. It was the chill. The rushes was very soft but damp. I was getting cold and debating to leave when they landed. Two geese swimming here and there as big as life, looking deep into each other's little pinhole eyes. Just the ones I was looking for. So I lifted Grandpa's gun to my shoulder, and I aimed perfectly, and blam, blam! I delivered 2 accurate shots, but the thing is, them shots missed. I couldn't hardly believe it. Whether it was that the shock had warped or the barrel got bent some ways, I don't know. But anyway, them geese flown off into the dim sky, and Lipshaw Morrissey was left there in the rushes with evening fallen and his 2 cold hands empty. He had before him just the prospect of another day of bone-cracking chill in them rushes, and the thought of it got him depressed. Now, it isn't my style, in no way, to get depressed. So I said to myself, Lipshaw Morrissey, You're a happy son of a bitch who could be covered up with weeds by now at the bottom of the slough, but instead you're alive to tell the tale. You might have problems in life, but you still got the touch. You got the power, Lipshaw Morrissey. Can't argue that. So put your mind to it and figure out how not to be depressed. I took my advice. I put my mind to it, but I never saw at the time how my thoughts led me astray toward a tragic outcome none could have known. I ignored all the danger, all the limits, for I was tired of sitting in the slough and my feet were numb. My face was aching. I was chilled, so I played with fire. I told myself love medicine was simple. I told myself the old superstitions was just that, strange beliefs. I told myself to take the $10 Mary McDonald had paid me for putting the touch on her arthritis joint, and the other $5 I hadn't spent yet from winning bingo last Thursday. I told myself to go down to the Red Owl store. And here is what I did that made the medicine backfire. I took an evil shortcut. I looked at birds that was dead and froze. All right, so now I guess you will say, slap a malpractice suit on Lipshaw Morrissey. I heard of those suits. I used to think it was a color clothing quack doctors had to wear so you could tell them from the good ones. Now I know better that it's law. As I walked back from the Red Owl with the rock-hard heavy turkeys, I argued to myself about malpractice. I thought of faith. I thought to myself that faith could be called belief against the odds and whether or not there's any proof. How does that sound? I thought how we might have to yell to be heard by higher power, but that's not saying it's not there. And that is faith for you. It's belief even when the goods don't deliver. Higher power makes promises we all know they can't back up. But anybody ever go and slap an old malpractice suit on God or the US government? No, they don't. Faith might be stupid, but it gets us through. So what I'm heading at is this. I finally convinced myself that the real actual power to the love medicine was not the goose heart itself, but the faith in the cure. I didn't believe it. I knew it was wrong, but by then I had waded so far into my lie, I was stuck there. And then I went one step further. The next day, I cleaned the hearts away from the paper packages of gizzards inside the turkeys. Then I wrapped them hearts with the clean hanky and brung them both to get blessed up at the mission. I wanted to get official blessings from the priest, but when Father answered the door to the rectory, wiping his hands on a little towel, I could tell he was a busy man. "Bashoo, Father," I said, "I got a slight request to make of you this afternoon." "What is it?" he said. "Would you bless this package?" I held out the hanky with the hearts tied inside it. He looked at the package, questioning it. "It's turkey hearts," I honestly had to reply. A look of annoyance crossed his face. "Why don't you bring this matter over to Sister Martin?" he said. "I have duties." And so, although the blessing wouldn't be as powerful, I went over to the sisters with the package. I rung the bell, and they brought Sister Martin to the door. I had her as a music teacher, but I was always so shy then. I never talked out loud. Now, I'd grown taller than Sister Martin. Looking down, I saw that she was not feeling up to snuff. Brown circles hung under her eyes. "What's the matter?" she said, not noticing who I was. "Remember me, sister?" She squinted up at me. "Oh, yeah," she said after a moment. "I'm sorry. You're the youngest of the Cashpaws, Gordy's brother." Her face warmed up. "Lipshaw," I said. "That's my name." "Well, Lipshaw," she said, smiling broad at me now. "What can I do for you?" They always said she was the kindest-hearted of the sisters up the hill, and she was. She brought me back into their own kitchen and made me take a big yellow wedge of cake and a glass of milk. "Now tell me," she said, nodding at my package, "what have you got wrapped up so carefully in those handkerchiefs?" Like before, I answered honestly. "Ah," said Sister Martin, "turkey hearts." She waited. I hoped you could bless them. She waited some more, smiling with her eyes. Kind-hearted though she was, I began to sweat. A person could not pull the wool down over Sister Martin. I stumbled through my mind for an explanation. Quick, that wouldn't scare her off. "They're a present," I said, "for St. Kateri's statue." "She's not a saint yet." "I know," asserted on, "in the hopes they will crown her." "Lipshaw," she said, "I never heard of such a thing." So I told her. "Well, the truth is," I said, "it's a kind of medicine." "For what?" "Love." "Oh, Lipshaw," she said after a moment, "you don't need any medicine. I'm sure any girl would like you exactly the way you are." I just sat there. I felt miserable, caught in my pack of lies. "Tell you what," she said, seeing how bad I felt, "my blessing won't make any difference anyway, but there is something you can do." I looked up at her, hopeless. "Just be yourself." I looked down at my plate. I knew I wasn't much to brag about right then, and I shortly became even less. For as I walked out the door, I stuck my fingers in the cup of holy water that was sacred from their touches. I put my fingers in and blessed the hearts, quick, with my own hand. I went back to Grandma and sat down in her little kitchen at the senior citizens. I unwrapped them hearts on the table, and her hard agate eyes went soft. She said she wasn't even going to cook those hearts up, but eat them raw, so their power would go down strong as possible. I couldn't hardly watch when she munched hers. Now that's true love. I was worried about how she would get Grandpa to eat his, but she told me she'd think of something, and don't worry. So I did not. I was supposed to hide off in her bedroom while she put dinner on a plate for Grandpa and fixed up the heart so he'd eat it. I caught a glint of the plate she was making for him. She put that heart smack on a piece of lettuce, like in a restaurant, and then attached to it a little heap of boiled peas. He sat down. I was listening in the next room. She said, "Why don't you have some mashed potato?" So he had some mashed potato. Then she gave him a little piece of boiled meat. He ate that. Then she said, why you didn't never touch your salad yet? See that heart? I'm feeding you it because the doctor said your blood needs building up. I couldn't help it. At that point, I peeked through a crack in the door. I saw Grandpa picking at that heart on his plate with a certain look. He didn't look appetized at all, is what I'm saying. I doubted our plan was going to work. Grandma was getting worried too. She told him one more time, loudly, that he had to eat the heart. Swallow it down, she said. You'll hardly notice it. He just looked at her straight on. The way he looked at her made me think I was going to see the smoke screen drop a second time. And sure enough, it happened. What do you want me to eat this for so bad? He asked uncannily. Now, Grandma knew the jig was up. She knew that he knew she was working medicine. He put his fork down. He rolled the heart around his saucer plate. I don't want to eat this, he said to Grandma. It don't look good. Why, it's fresh grade A, she told him. 100%. He didn't ask percent what, but his eyes took on an even more warier look. Just go on and try it, she said, taking the salt shaker up in her hand. She was getting annoyed. Not tasty enough? You want me to salt it for you? She waved the shaker over his plate. All right, skinny white girl. She had got Grandpa mad. Oopsie daisy. He popped the heart into his mouth. I was about to yawn loudly and come out of the bedroom. I was about ready for this crash of wheels to be over when I saw he was still up to his old tricks. First, he rolled it into one side of his cheek. He said. Then he rolled it into the other side of his cheek. Again. Then he stuck his tongue out with the heart on it and put it back. And there was no time to react. He had pulled Grandma's leg once too far. Her goat was got. She was so mad she hopped up quick as a wink and slugged him between the shoulder blades to make him swallow. Only thing is, he choked. He choked real bad. A person can choke to death. You ever sit down at a restaurant table and up above you there is a list of instructions what to do if something slides down the wrong pipe? It sure makes you chew slow, that's for damn sure. When Grandpa fell off his chair, better believe me, that little graphic illustrated poster fled into my mind. I jumped out the bedroom. I'd done everything within my power that I could to unlodge what was choking him. I squeezed beneath his rib cage. I socked him in the back. I was desperate. But here's the factor of decision. He wasn't choking on the heart alone. There was more to it than that. It was other things that choked him as well. It didn't seem like he wanted to struggle or fight. Death came and tapped his chest, so he went just like that. I'm sorry all through my body at what I'd done to him with that heart. And there's those who will say Lipshaw Morrissey is just excusing himself off the hook by giving song and dance about how Grandpa gave up. Maybe I can't admit what I did. My touch had gone worthless. That is true. But here is what I seen while he lay in my arms. You hear a person's life will flash before their eyes when they're in danger. It was him in danger, not me. But it was his life come over me. I saw him dying, and it was like someone pulled the shade down in a room. His eyes clouded over and squeezed shut. But just before that, I looked in. He was still fishing in the middle of Machu Manito. Big Thoughts was on his line, and he had half a case of beer in the boat. He waved at me, grinned, and then the bobber went under. Grandma had gone out of the room crying for help. I bunched my force up in my hands and I held him. I was so wound up I couldn't even breathe. All the moments he had spent with me, all the times he had hoisted me on his shoulders or pointed into the leaves was concentrated in that moment. Time was flashing back and forth like a pinball machine. Lights blinked and balls hopped and rubber bands chirped until suddenly I realized the last ball had gone down the drain and there was nothing. I felt his force leaving him, flowing out of Grandpa, never to return. I felt his mind weakening, the bobber going under in the lake, and I felt the touch retreat back into the darkness inside my body from where it came. One time, long ago, both of us were fishing together. We caught a big old snapper, what started toward us around like it was a motor. This here fish line is pretty damn good, Grandpa said. Let's keep this turtle on and see where it takes us. So we rode along behind that turtle, watching as from time to time it surfaced. The thing was just about the size of a wash tub. It took us all around the lake twice, and as it was traveling, Grandpa said something as a joke. Lipshaw, he said, we are glad your mother didn't want you, because we was always looking for a boy like you who would tow us around the lake. I ain't no snapper. Snappers are so stupid they stay alive when their head's chopped off, I said. That ain't stupidity, said Grandpa. Their brains just in their heart, like yours is. When I looked up, I knew the fuse had blown between my heart and my mind, and that a terrible understanding was to be given. Grandma got back into the room and I saw her stumble, and then she went down too. It was like a house you can't hardly believe has stood so long through years of record weather suddenly goes down in the worst yet. It makes sense, is what I'm saying, but you still can't hardly believe it. You think a person you know has got through death and illness and being broke and living on commodity rice will get through anything. Then they fold, and you see how fragile were the stones that underpin them. You see how instantly the ground can shift when you thought was solid. You see the stop signs and the yellow dividing markers of roads you traveled and all the instructions you had played according to vanish. You see how all the everyday things you counted on was just a dream you'd been having by which you run your whole life. She had been over me like a sheer overhang of rock dividing Lipshaw Morrissey from outer space. And now she went underneath. It was as though the banks gave way on the shores of Machimanito, and where Grandpa's passing was just the bobber swallowed under by his biggest thought. Her fall was the house, and the rock under it sliding after, sending half the lake splashing up to the clouds, where there was nothing. You play them games never knowing what you see. When I fell into the dream alongside of both of them, I saw that the dominions I had defended myself from anciently was but delusions of the screen, blips of light, and I was scot-free now, whittling through space. I didn't know how I'd come back. I don't know from where. They was slapping my face when I arrived back at Senior Citizens, and they was oxygenating her. I saw her chest move, almost unwillingly. She sighed the way she would when somebody bothered her in the middle of a row of beads she was counting. I think it irritated her to no end that they brought her back. I knew from the way she looked after they took the mask off, she was not going to forgive them disturbing her restful peace. Nor was she forgiving Lipshaw Morrissey. She had been stepping out onto the road of death, she told the children later at the funeral. I asked was there any stop signs or dividing markers on that road, but she clamped her lips in a vice the way she always done when she was mad, which didn't bother me. I knew when things had cleared out, she wouldn't have no choice. I was not going to speculate where the blame was put for Grandpa's death. We was in it together. She had slugged him between the shoulders. My touch had failed him, never to return. All the blood children and the tookins, like me, came home from Minneapolis and Chicago, where they had relocated years ago. They stayed with friends on the reservation, or with Aurelia, or slept on Grandma's floor. They were struck down with grief and bereavement for sure, every one of them. At the funeral, I sat down in the back of the church with Albertine. She'd gotten all skinny and ragged-haired from cramming all her years of study into 2 or 3. She decided that to be a nurse was not enough for her, so she was going to be a doctor. But the way she was straining her mind didn't look too hopeful. Her eyes were bloodshot from driving and crying. She took my hand. From the back, we watched all the children and the mourners as they hunched over their prayers, their hands stuffed full of Kleenex. It was someplace in that long side service that my vision shifted. I began to see things different, more clear. The family kneeling down turned to rocks in a field. It struck me how strong and reliable grief was, and death. Until the end of time, death would be our rock. So I had perspective on it all. For death gives you that. All the Cashpaw children had done various things to me in their lives, shared their folks with me, loaned me cash, beat me up in secret, and I decided, because of death, then and there I'd call it quits. If I ever saw King again, I'd shake his hand. Forgiving somebody else made the whole thing easier to bear. Everybody saw Grandpa off into the next world, and then the cash cows had to get back to their jobs, which was numerous and impressive. I had a few beers with them, and I went back to Grandma, who had sort of got lost in the shuffle of everybody being sad about Grandpa and glad to see one another. Zelda had sat beside her the whole time and was sitting with her now. I wanted to talk to Grandma, say how sorry I was that it wasn't her fault, but only mine. I would have, but Zelda gave me one of her looks of strict warning, as if to say, I'll take care of Grandma. Don't horn in on the women. If only Zelda knew, I thought, the sad realities would change her. But of course, I couldn't tell the dark truth. It was evening, late. Grandma's light was on underneath a crack in the door. About a week had passed since we buried Grandpa. I knocked first, but there wasn't no answer, so I went right in. The door was unlocked. She was there, but she didn't notice me at first. Her hands were tied up in the rosary, and her gaze was fully absorbed in the easy chair opposite her, the one that had always been Grandpa's favorite. I stood there, staring with her at the little green nubs in the cloth, plastic armrest covers, and the sad little hair tonic stain he had made on the white doily where he had laid his head. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out what she was staring at. Thin space. Then she turned. He ain't gone yet, she said. Remember that chill I luckily didn't get from wading in the slough? I got it now. I felt it start from the very center of me, where fear hides, waiting to attack. It spiraled outwards so that in minutes my fingers and teeth were shaking and clattering. I knew she told the truth. She'd seen Grandpa. Whether or not he had been there is not the point. She had seen him, and that meant anybody else could see him too. Not only that, but as is usually the case with these here ghosts, he had a certain uneasy reason to come back. And of course, Grandma Cashpaw had scanned it out. I sat down. We sat together on the couch, watching his chair out of the corner of our eyes. She had found him sitting in his chair when she walked in the door. It's the love medicine, my Lipshaw, she said. It was stronger than we thought. He came back even after death to claim me to his side. I was afraid. We shouldn't have tampered with it, I said. She agreed. For a while, we sat still. I don't know what she thought, but my head felt screwed on backward. I couldn't accurately consider the situation, so I told Grandma to go to bed. I would sleep on the couch, keeping my eye on Grandpa's chair. Maybe he would come back and maybe he wouldn't. I guess I feared the one as much as the other, but I got to thinking, see, as I lay there in the darkness, that perhaps even through my terrible mistakes, some good might come. If Grandpa did come back, I thought he'd return in his right mind. I could talk with him. I could tell him it was all my fault for playing with power I did not understand. Maybe he'd forgive me and rest in peace. I hoped this. I calmed myself and waited for him all night. He fooled me, though. He knew what I was waiting for, and it wasn't what he was looking to hear. Come dawn, I heard a blood-splitting cry from the bedroom, and I rushed in there. Grandma turned the lights on. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, and her face looked harsh, pinched up, gray. He was here, she said. He came and laid down next to me in bed, and he touched me. Her heart broke down. She cried. His touch was so cold. She laid back in bed after a while, as it was morning, and I went to the couch. As I lay there falling asleep, I suddenly felt Grandpa's presence and the barrier between us like a swollen river. I felt how I had wronged him, how awful was the place where I had sent him. Behind the wall of death, he'd watched the living eat and cry and get drunk. He was lonesome, but I understood he meant no harm. Go back, I said to the dark, afraid and yet full of pity. You got to be with your own kind now, I said. I felt him retreating, like a sigh, growing less. I felt his spirit as it shrunk back through the walls, the blinds, the brick courtyard of senior citizens. Look up Aunt June, I whispered as he left. I slept late the next morning, a good hard sleep allowing the sun to rise and warm the earth. It was past noon when I awoke. There was nothing, to my mind, like a long sleep to make those hard decisions that you neglect under stress of wakefulness. Soon as I woke up that morning, I saw exactly what I'd say to Grandma. I had gotten humble in the past week, not just losing the touch, but getting jolted into the understanding that would prey on me from here on out. Your life feels different on you once you greet death and understand your heart's position. You wear your life like a garment from the mission bundle sale ever after, lightly because you realize you never paid nothing for it, cherishing because you know you won't never come by such a bargain again. Although you have the feeling someone wore it before you and someone will after. I can't explain that, not yet, but I'm putting my mind to it. Grandma, I said, I got to be honest about the love medicine. She listened. I knew from then on she would be listening to me the way I had listened to her before. I told her about the turkey hearts and how I had blessed them. I told her what I used as love medicine was purely a fake. And then I said to her what my understanding brought me. Love medicine ain't what brings him back to you, Grandma. No, it's something else. He loved you over time and distance, but he went off so quick, he never got the chance to tell you how he loves you, how he doesn't blame you, how he understands. It's true feeling, not no magic. No supermarket heart could have brung him back. She looked at me. She was seeing the years and days I had no way of knowing, and she didn't believe me. I could tell this. Yet a look came on her face. It was like the look of mothers drinking sweetness from their children's eyes. It was tenderness. Lipshaw, she said, you was always my favorite. She took the beads off the bedpost where she kept them to say at night, and she told me to put out my hand. When I did this, she shut the beads inside of my fist and held them there a long minute, tight so my hand hurt. I almost cried when she did this. I don't really know why. Tears shot up behind my eyelids, and yet it was nothing. I didn't understand, except her hand was so strong, squeezing mine. The earth was full of life, and there were dandelions growing out the window, thick as thieves, already seeded, fat as big yellow plungers. She let my hand go. I got up. I'll go out and dig a few dandelions, I told her. Outside, the sun was hot and heavy as a hand on my back. I felt it flow down my arms, out my fingers, arrowing through the ends of the fork into the earth. With every root I prized up there was return, as if I was kin to its secret lesson. The touch got stronger as I worked through the grassy afternoon. Uncurling from me like a seed out of the blackness where I was lost, the touch spread. The spiked leaves full of bitter mother's milk, a buried root, a nuisance people dig up and throw in the sun to wither, a globe of frail seeds that's indestructible.